Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
You know, yesterday I had a conversation with somebody, and they asked me. They reached out to me. They reached out via email, and they wanted me to review. They wanted me to review a business document or a business dealing they were doing, and they wanted me to look at the documents. And I'm like, fine. I'm not an attorney anymore, so I can't really opine as a lawyer. But as a business person, I can give you my 2 cents. And so I gave him, my friend, my 2 cents as to, hey, this is what I see, and here's my thoughts on it. It doesn't really matter; it's not relevant to the story. But the person just fired right back and like, no, I didn't want you to talk about that. I wanted you to talk about this. I really wanted you to look at this. I'm like, oh, okay. I was kind of taken back by the tone. And I'm like, all right, this is what I think about what you're asking. Really wasn't clear to begin with, but this is what I think. But I really think you need to consider what I originally said too, because that's all part of the whole story, the whole picture. And then I sent it off, and then almost not immediately, but shortly thereafter, I got another email back, just totally angry that I was talking about something they didn't want me to talk about. I've got other people who are going to be looking at this, and you didn't need to do that. And why did you do that? And shortly thereafterwards, I got a angry audio text message from them, which is like totally like, oh my gosh, you're not paying me to do this. This is just something out of the goodness of my heart to give, it's. So anyway, I was telling my wife about it, and she's like, I would be done with that person. And I don't want to be done with the person as, hey, you can't be my friend anymore because you kind of flew off the handle. But I'm going to be really leery about referring them. Again, it's all about know, like, and trust. And there's something missing. I really have to find an opportunity to sit with this person and just say, you know what? That was just uncalled for. And that's, coming down the pike, that's going to happen. But it's a great lead in for our guest today, Robin Hills. He's the director of EI for Change, a company that specializes in educational training, coaching, and personal development, focused around emotional intelligence, which I just kind of alluded to, positive psychology, and neuroscience. This guy's right up my alley. He's taught over 400,000 people in 195 countries how to build resilience, increase self-awareness, and understanding of others. His educational programs on resilience and emotional intelligence covers the most comprehensive and detailed education of any emotional intelligence organization, and are today used in educational establishments in South Africa and India. He's the author of 2 books and has through his work developed the experimental coaching methodology, Images of Resilience, to support cathartic conversations around resilience. He's delivered keynote speeches at conferences across the world, including Harvard here in the States, and sits on the Northwest Committee of Association of Business Psychologists, or Psychology, excuse me. Robin, welcome to the program.
Frank, it's a pleasure to be here. Wow, what a great introduction and what a great story. Thank you for having me on your show.
The story I told, the person, they need you. They need something, right?
Well, you need me as well, because
Sure.
Here we have a great example of emotional intelligence in play. You were being faced with somebody who at the time was showing low levels of emotional intelligence. You have to manage your own emotions around it.
Yeah.
So I think for your listeners, let's define what this construct is of emotional intelligence. It's the way in which you combine your thinking with your feelings in order to make good quality decisions and build up authentic relationships. Now, when we look at the scenario that you painted, here was somebody who didn't manage their emotions particularly well, didn't make good quality decisions, particularly around communicating with you exactly what they were looking for and what they needed. And it's had an impact on your relationship. Now, the only thing you can control in all of this is you and how you're going to use your emotional intelligence and how you can respond. And from what you've told me and what you've described, I think you operated in the most emotionally intelligent way. You controlled your emotions, you worked with them, you interacted with the person without losing your rag, and you got support from other relationships, your good lady wife and me, in terms of helping you to deal with the situation.
Well, and I will say this. I'll say a couple things. One, I'm not perfect, right? But as this interaction is going on, I can feel my primitive brain kicking in, right? I want to strangle somebody. I can't believe you're doing this to me. But one of the things I did want to mention, we talked about this before we hit record, is God gave us one brain. We don't have a special compartment for business, and so all of these interactions all the things you do are applicable in personal lives as much as professional lives, in my opinion.
It is. And hey, Frank, I'm not perfect either. I've been working in the field of emotional intelligence for all of my career, but I've been labeling it as such in the last 15 years. And there are times when I'll go into a situation and I'll lose my rag. I'll just completely screw up. I may be tired. I may be hungry. I may be not feeling particularly well. I just don't handle it well. And then there are other times I go into more challenging situations and I amaze myself in terms of how I've worked with it.
No, I think you're right. I think it's, having a good night's rest, and recognizing when we're, just recognizing when we're off. I tell people out networking, if you're not feeling it, just stay home, because sometimes you can do more damage to yourself than staying home is better than just going out and making a fool of yourself.
It is, or going out and shutting up. Just go out and listen.
No, that's even better advice, to be honest. Just listen.
And learn to ask questions of people. That's interesting. Tell me more. Why did you say that? What are you doing that for? Is there another way of doing it? How can I help you? All of these are good, emotionally intelligent questions that drive the conversation forward.
I think those are certainly good techniques. How did you get into this?
How did I get into emotional intelligence?
This is a field. Well, this is a relatively young field of study.
Well, it is and it isn't. The interesting thing is, and this is really interesting and really relevant, Aristotle said back in ancient Greece, anyone can become angry. That's easy. But to be angry with the right person to the right degree at the right time for the right purpose and in the right way, that's not easy, as it's not in everyone's power. Now, that is emotional intelligence. It's emotional intelligence in action. And, I try my hardest to live by that principle. But if anybody out there knows how to do it, can they let me know, please?
Yeah. Well, I guess what I mean by it's relatively, we've had these reactions, we've had these feelings for as long as we've been human. We're really starting to really dig into why these things are. And when right. I don't mean the last 2 years, I mean, in the last couple decades, they're really having people dig into psychology, and it's the whole field of positive psychology is relatively new.
It is. It's a social science. Emotional intelligence was first used as a term by a couple of Yale professors back in the 1980s, and it was in the 1990s that Daniel Goldman published his work in this area that brought it into the public consciousness. And then to answer one of the questions that you asked me earlier, why did I get into this? I realized that it was emotional intelligence, which was important in terms of building up relationships. And I set my business up because I really was driven and motivated by interacting with people, motivating them, and trying to understand them. So that's the reason why I got into this field, and I built my business up based around that. And a lot of the connections that I made, particularly in the early days, were through networking.
Well, everything's done through networking. That's
it is.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah. But yeah, back to this whole what's your term for it? Losing your rag? Is that?
Yeah, it's a kind of British term. I'm from the United Kingdom. You lose your rag, or yeah, it's I don't know where it's come from, but it's a nice way of saying I got really angry.
Yeah, no, it's well, I used the term with you before we hit record. This is not your first rodeo, which is really kind of an American term. But what sorts of things do you? In what sorts of ways do you work with your clientele? I mean, are people referred to you? You know, hey, I've got this employee and they're missing a filter or missing a chip. You know, they're losing their rag all the time, and I need to kind of tone them down. Is that how it?
I've had that.
Okay.
Yes, I've had that. No, what I like to do is not work with dysfunctional teams. I like to work with high-performing teams and make them even better. So a lot of my work is around leadership. It's around relationship building. It's around collaboration. And a lot of my work is involved in helping people to understand themselves better, giving them more self-awareness, looking at what it is that makes them tick, looking at what their strengths are, and really highlighting what those strengths are so that we can get more of those. So whereas a lot of organizations will like to hone in on people's weakness and take something that's bad and make it not bad, I want to take something that's good and make it brilliant. And interestingly, by having that focus, all of the weaknesses become minimized.
Interesting. I would imagine at this point, because you are so well established, you've taught over 400,000 people, 195 countries. I didn't know there were 195 countries.
No, neither did I.
Yeah. I would imagine at this point, because you're so well established, that you're somewhat sought after. But in the early days,
in the early days, Frank, it was really hard.
Okay.
Really, really tough. Look, let's be honest here with your listeners. Setting up a business is not an easy option. And I'll tell you a little story. I was working in the pharmaceutical industry. I lived and worked in London for much of that part of my career, moved up to the Northwest to take up a leadership role. And then through a series of changes within the organizations that I worked for, my role was made redundant. But my focus, my network was all down in the southern part of England. So I was starting up a business with no clients, and everything was focused around the pharmaceutical industry. Now I went back to some of the companies that I worked with, worked for, and some of the managers that I worked with, and sought to sell my services back to them, but they weren't interested. So I had to develop a network very, very, very quickly around the northwest of England, around Bolton, which is where I live. So I joined a number of networking groups. And it was through these networking groups that my business got established, imperceptibly slowly, I hasten to add, but it's grown and developed from those very early days. And indeed, people in my network all those years ago are still very much my business contacts today.
I would imagine early on that what you do, obviously starting a business is tough, and anybody listening who's in business knows that. It doesn't matter what you do, it's not easy. But early on, people didn't. To what extent did you feel like a charlatan trying to sell people on, something that is not in the consciousness of a lot of people? And the reason I say that is I know a lot of people who are in the corporate realm, right? They work a job. All they do is they do accounts payables, or whatever. They just have one little thing. And I talk to them about professional development, personal development, and they're just like, yeah, I don't do that. I don't do those, so this whole notion, it would just be foreign to them. I just have a sense that you would really kind of run into a lot of, oh, really? No, thanks.
Oh, yes. Yeah, very much so. Because I was going out there naively selling emotional intelligence. And a lot of people hadn't even heard of the concept, let alone understood it and were able to apply it. So really, it's a case of going back to basics. What is it that I do in terms of making a difference? And rather than talking about things like personal development or psychometrics or positive psychology or emotional intelligence, it's really saying to people, look, if you've got issues within your team, you've got conflict, you want to build up collaborative ways of working, you want to look at your leadership capability, your leadership skills, that's where I can help. I help to align people to the business objectives. I help to add money to the bottom line. I improve profitability by helping people to feel good about what they do and align them to the business objectives. That's what I do. That's what I deliver, which again is all underpinned by emotional intelligence. But emotional intelligence really is the sizzle on the sausage.
Right. What's if you could come up with one tip for the listeners? Hey, this is what here's an exercise. Here's something that you should be doing. And I get what you do is, it is not like tying your shoes, right? Where it's, hey, just do this, this, and this, and you're done, and you're all set. It's very complicated. But what's that one thing that they could just take away from this conversation and say, okay, yeah, I can start doing that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, Frank. I'd like to just broaden it out before I specifically answer it, because a lot of people think that emotional intelligence is like an on-off switch. It's an all or nothing. I either develop my emotional intelligence by reading a book or watching a few videos, or I don't do anything at all. But the thing is, you've actually got to work on it. You've got to go away. You've got to change the way you behave. You've got to make mistakes. You've got to fall over. You've got to scrape your knee. You've got to upset people along the way. And through that, you can learn to be a better human being. So let's go back right to the beginning of our conversation, and let's pick up and provide everybody with a tip around anger and anger management. I think the first thing to do is to identify what it is that makes you angry. Anger, I see as being a very useful emotion, but we've got to learn to work with it, and we've got to learn to handle it. Now, often people will label it as being a negative emotion. It's not a negative emotion because we're experiencing anger. Somebody has transgressed one of our core values. There's been a breakdown in communication. What is it that makes you angry? What is it that offends you? What is it that you wish people would do? What is it that you wish people wouldn't do? Once you've got the answer to those questions, these are internal personal questions, you can then watch out for it. And when you recognize that somebody who is going to press that hot button of yours, you can put some space between that press and your reaction. Now, the person who knows your hot buttons better than you is your wife.
Yeah.
So you need to have that conversation with her. What is it that people do that makes me angry? What do you recognize in me? And if I can take you back to your boyhood, because I'll take you back to my boyhood. The people that really knew what my hot buttons were and really knew how to press them and really knew how to wind me up were my brother and sister.
And that's probably true today.
Still very much so, yes.
Yeah, because I love my brother and sister dearly, but yeah, they press my buttons. They don't intentionally do it. It's just the way they operate doesn't necessarily jive with the way I operate, but I think it is good to kind of recognize, okay, why is this making me angry? I remember a situation last week where I got angry about something, and it was just okay, it's an ego thing, right? It's not this was a phone call, so it's not a physical threat sort of a thing. It's an ego thing. They're challenging my authority. They're challenging my decision. They're diminishing my intelligence, and that angered me. And I need to take a deep breath, and I just need to remind myself that, okay, they're welcome to have an opinion, right? That's all it is. That's an opinion. And their opinion is no better than mine, and
it's just different.
Yeah.
It's just different. Look, emotional intelligence is not about you stopping yourself from being angry. Emotional intelligence is actually allowing for that anger to happen. But emotional intelligence is really putting that space between you experiencing that emotion and you expressing it. So what is it that you need to do in order to express it more appropriately? And that is what makes us human, because we've got choice.
Yeah. No, someone once said to me, what's the biggest room in your house? I said, I don't know. He said, it's the room for improvement, which is, it's so true. It's so true. And I love what you said. It's not an on-off switch. It's not like, okay, I'm done, I've got it. I've got to continually sort of monitor it. It's like bathing. I'm not going to bathe today, take a shower or take a bath and then be good for forever. It's like, I gotta focus on hygiene tomorrow too, and the day after. And so I constantly have to be on the forefront of kind of knowing what's making me mad or whatever it might be. Again, I'm not perfect. Let's switch gears here real quickly, Robin. How can someone listening and saying, geez, I need to know more about Robin and EI for Change? What sorts of people are you looking to work with? How can people help you? How can they get a hold of you?
People can help me by helping themselves, seeking me out if they want to speak to me or ask me any questions. I'm more than happy to communicate with anybody. The easiest way to get hold of me is through my website, which is eiforchange.com. EI, emotional intelligence, 4, change.com.
I know. I appreciate you clarifying that. I will get that in the show notes. Many people who listen to this are driving. Just keep driving.
Yeah. Keep driving.
Yep.
And Frank, the other way to get hold of me is to look out for Robin Hills on LinkedIn. And, I'm more than happy to connect with anybody.
Well, I really appreciate your time today. This has been fascinating. It's always fascinating, this topic. I love talking psychology. Maybe we'll come back on again at some point.
I'd love to. Thank you.
We'll figure out a topic to really take a deep dive into.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.